Gotta feel so fucking weird sometimes when you're just saying the script to yourself.
All this fancy ass bullshit that I see on YouTube, I don't have time for that. I work full time and I don't get paid enough to eat out every day. And when I do eat out, they always give me a piss poor serving size of shit food packed with cheap calories. So here's my channel. I cook things that are easy, cheap, bold, and healthier than what you can find outside.
My name is Chi and I'm a bad chef. Are you a single piece of shit? Are you terrified of the thought of dying alone? Well, why not learn how to cook? Because instead of having 0 redeeming aspects of your personality, you can now have 1, which will hopefully be enough to fool somebody into being attracted to you. So we're trying to make this facade look extra convincing today. So we're gonna make something that's wanky and sounds impressive, but really isn't that hard to make. Today we're gonna make a lobster bisque. So a lobster is basically a big old prawn, and bisque basically means creamy soup. So don't think on it too much. What we're making today is big prawn creamy soup. Nor is it really hard to make, to be honest. Remember when we made beef burgundy? It's exactly the same steps, except we're using shellfish instead of beef, and we're using our potion water instead of the red wine as a stock. And I know that it's a little bit more time consuming and it might be a little bit more finicky here or there, but I'm assuming your data's worth it. So if you step through this with me, I guarantee you'll be fine.
First, we have to get us some lobster.
Of course, every chef in the world is going to go, oh, down at the fish market to buy fresh. But god damn it, we're busy people. We've got shit to do. So we're going to go to Woolworths and buy whatever the fuck is there because we can get our entire week's worth of groceries in one place. So we're going to do that.
Interestingly, my local Woolies doesn't sell whole lobsters. They only seem to sell tails.
Bit of a shame, really. There's actually a heap of flavor inside the lobster head. So to compensate for that, we're going to use a bunch of green prawns.
So Woolies sells 2 types of lobster tails. The first one is an Australian green rock lobster tail, which is about $20 each. And the second one is imported, which is about $8 each on special.
I mean, if you really like a date, go on. Buy the $20 one. It's cheaper than an Uber ride.
Both of them come frozen or frozen thawed.
And frozen is never going to be as good because when you freeze it, it pushes all the water out, dries up the meat a little bit. But these are our only options, so we're just going to do that.
Right, let's cook. Now, to prep the lobster tails, if they're completely thawed, you only need to boil them in a pot of salted water for about 2 minutes. Not to cook them fully, but just to loosen the meat from the shells.
Now, this part's really important. Whatever you do, do not dump out your water. This is where all the flavor's at and it'll form the foundation to our bisque.
Once the lobster tails are blanched, press inwards on the outsides of the shells in a tea towel, then use a pair of kitchen shears to cut away the underside of the tail. Gently shuffle the lobster tail out and set that aside. The shells, return that back to the water. Now, since I'm doing prawns as well, I'm also going to be blanching them, shelling them, then putting all the heads and shells back into the water. You want to boil the living shit out of the heads and the shells until all the flavor is in the water. Boil them on medium-low heat for as long as you can be bothered.
For about 30 minutes. I've seen some recipes call for 3 hours, but honestly, I can't be asked. So it's going to boil for as long as it takes for me to do the rest of the prep, which should hopefully be around half an hour. Here's a learning moment. That is basically what a normal lobster tail should look like. That one's basically turned to mush because it was frozen, then thawed out and left to sit on the counter for a bit too long. So that's the dangers of buying frozen. But I am glad that we have these prawns as backup because I bought these fresh and they're going to be delicious.
While that's cooking, it's time to prep the rest of the bisque. Remember the classic mirepoix combo? We're going to be using that today too, so cut up 2 carrots, 2 celery stalks, 2 medium-sized onions, and also 2 cloves of garlic along with that as well. Don't worry about finesse too much because we'll blend it all later on anyway. But melt some butter in some neutral oil on medium-high heat and fry off the garlic for about 15 seconds. When that's done, add in the onion, then the rest of the mirepoix, then cook it down until it's soft. When that's done, add in about 350 ml of whatever cheap white wine you have lying about. I'm using dry sherry today because I want a bit more of a robust taste. A bottle should set you back about $6 at your local bottler. Boil off the alcohol, then hit the pot with a can of crushed tomatoes and season to taste with salt and pepper. I also elected to put in some lemon thyme and tarragon as well, but that's entirely up to you. At this point, if you don't have something like a stick blender, it's the ideal moment to blend the soup to bits. Ladle it in, give it a blitz, and return it to the pot. At this point, your seafood stock should pretty much be ready, so use a strainer to remove all the shells and shit, and then pour all the water back into the pot. Bring it back to boil, give it a stir, lower the heat to a simmer, and then start reducing some of the water out of it.
So from here on, it's basically just a waiting game. Simmer it down for about half an hour, reduce some of the water out of it, then you're pretty much at the finish line. With regards to the question of how much to reduce it, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string sort of question. I mean, if you want it to taste really strong, reduce it a lot. If you want it to taste a bit lighter, don't reduce it so much. I mean, the most important thing is to just keep tasting it. Make sure that it's something that you would want to eat. So my secret ingredient of today is going to be oyster sauce. A lot of different recipes will call for chicken bouillon, but I'm going to use this because A, it's more seafoody, B, it tastes better.
After it's been reduced and you're almost ready to serve, the last part left is the lobster meat. You can poach it for 4 minutes to completion, but if you want a bit more pizzazz, heat up some butter and oil in a pan, throw in some garlic and lemon thyme, and fry the lobster tail off in that. The meat doesn't take too long to cook, especially if it's been butterflied, so 1 or 2 minutes in a pan will usually do. You can check if it's done by the color of the meat, which should be opaque, and the texture, which should be slightly elastic, but not rubbery. Alright, let's serve! Ladle the bisque into a nice bowl, pour in a generous amount of cream, and give a brief swirl before garnishing with a few thyme leaves. Serving it with freshly toasted baguette and garlic butter would be ideal, but tonight I'm using my favorite pan de casa. Then, to finish plating, crown the dish with the lobster tail.
Oh, come on. As if your date won't be impressed by that. I mean, if your date doesn't get a little bit moist over that, probably not a person that you want to date in the first place. I mean, goddamn, come on. Come on. Oh my god. Alright, so here's the lowdown. The soup is incredible. It is creamy. There's a little bit of acidity from the tomatoes, but it's balanced out with a sweetness from the rest of the vegetables with that really seafoody taste from our stock. The lobster and the prawns are steamy, tender, succulent, amazing. I mean, Australian rock lobsters, regardless of whether they're frozen or fresh, are always going to taste pretty damn good. And the bread, well, bread's bread, but it provides a calorific punch that this meal needs to actually feed you. And plus it just soaks up all the flavors of the soup. Honestly, this is like the perfect recipe for like a winter date. It's a cold night, hot food, white wine followed by a bit of banter, and with some luck, maybe a few hours of respecting the living shit out of each other's personal spaces. Here's an idea. If you're feeling a bit more innovative for your date, you can actually convert this sort of meal into like a hot pot setup, where the base is like a slightly less reduced, more stocky version of the bisque. So you just put the whole pot onto like a portable gas stove and you poach things in it as you go. Yeah, run it by your date, see if he or she likes that sort of thing. In terms of cost, if you went for the cheap one, that comes to $15 a serving. If you go for the expensive one, it comes to $27 per serving. But when you compare that against like a restaurant's price, they'll easily charge $40 for anything with a trace of seafood in it, and not even to mention lobster, which will be market price, which means expensive. And plus, it's generally frowned upon to canoodle in a restaurant, but you totally could in the comfort of your own home. But there you have it, a French-style lobster bisque with a garlic-buttered Australian rock lobster tail. Done.
I hope you know her for the tagging. You know this cookie's for the bag. Kitty, kitty, baby, get her things to rest. Cause you done beat her like the 68 Jets. Diamonds are nothing when I'm rockin' with ya. Diamonds are nothing when I'm shining with ya. Just keep it white and black as if I'm your sister. I'm too hip to hop around, time to hit with ya. I know I get wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow.